Guides are used for academic papers and professional journals, and have become de facto standards in particular fields, though the bulk of their material pertains to formatting of source citations in mutually conflicting ways. Some examples are those issued by the American Medical Association, the Modern Language Association, and the Modern Humanities Research Association. There are many others. Scientific Style and Format by the Council of Science Editors seeks to normalize style in scientific journal publishing, based where possible on standards issued by bodies like the International Standards Organization. None of these works have any sort of legal or regulatory authority, though some governments produce their own house-style books for internal use. They still have authority in the sense that a student may be marked down for failure to follow a specified style manual, a professional publisher may enforce compliance, and a publication may require its employees to use house style as a matter of on-the-job competence. A well-respected style guide, and usually one intended for a general audience, may also have the kind of authority that a dictionary does, consulted as a reference work to satisfy personal curiosity or settle an argument. Origins historically, linguistic prescriptivism originates in a standard language when a society establishes social stratification and a socio-economic hierarchy. The spoken and written language usages of the authorities, state, military, church, are preserved as the standard language. Departures from this standard language may jeopardize social success. See social class. Sometimes, archaisms and honorific stylizations may be deliberately introduced or preserved to distinguish the prestige form of the language from contemporary colloquial language. Likewise, the style of language used in ritual also differs from everyday speech. Special ceremonial languages known only to a select few spiritual leaders are found throughout the world. Liturgical Latin has served a similar function for centuries. When a culture develops a writing system, orthographic rules for the consistent transcription of culturally important works, laws, scriptures, contracts, poetry, etc., allow a large number of speakers to understand written communications easily and across multiple generations. Early historical trends in literacy and alphabetization were closely tied to the influence of various religious institutions. Western Christianity propagated the Latin alphabet. Eastern Orthodoxy spread the Greek and Cyrillic alphabets. Judaism used the Hebrew alphabet, and Islam the Arabic alphabet. Hinduism used the Devanagari script. In certain traditions, strict adherence to prescribed spellings and pronunciations was and remains of great spiritual importance. Islamic naming conventions and greetings are notable examples of linguistic prescription being prerequisite to spiritual righteousness. Another commonly cited example of prescriptive language usage closely associated with social propriety is the system of honorific speech. In Japanese, most, if not all, widely spoken languages demonstrate some degree of social codification in how they conform to prescriptive rules. Linguistic prestige is a central research topic within sociolinguistics. Notions of linguistic prestige apply to different dialects of the same language and also to separate, distinct languages in multilingual regions. Prestige level disparity often leads to diglossia. Speakers, in certain social contexts, consciously choose a prestige language or dialect over a less prestigious one, even if it is their native tongue. Government bureaucracy tends toward prescriptivism as a means of enforcing functional continuity. Such prescriptivism dates from ancient Egypt, where bureaucrats preserved the spelling of the Middle Kingdom of Egypt into the Ptolemaic period through the standard usage of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Sources from the earliest attempts at prescription. In classical times, grammarians have based their norms on observed prestige use of language. Modern prescriptivist textbooks draw heavily on descriptive linguistic analysis. Prescription may privilege some existing forms over others for the sake of maximizing clarity and precision in language use. Others are subjective judgments of what constitutes good taste. Some reflect the promotion of one class or region within a language community over another, which can become politically controversial. Prescription can also reflect ethical considerations, as in prohibiting swear words. Words referring to elements of sexuality or toilet hygiene may be regarded as obscene. Blasphemies against religion may be forbidden. In recent decades, political correctness has had a profound censorious effect. Some elements of prescription in English are sometimes thought to have been based on the norms of Latin grammar. Robert Loth is frequently cited as having done so, but he specifically objected to forcing the English under the rules of a foreign language. It is true that analogies with Latin were sometimes used to buttress arguments, but only in defending an accepted prestige form of English. Criticisms. Although the standardization of language has an established place in such fields as broadcasting, computer programming, and international commerce, prescriptivism is often subject to criticism. Many linguists, such as Geoffrey Pullum, and other posters to Language Log, are highly skeptical of the quality of advice given in many usage guides, including highly regarded books like Strunk and White's Elements of Style. In particular, linguists point out that popular books on English usage written by journalists or novelists, e.g. Simon Heffer's Strictly English, The Correct Way to Write, and Why It Matters, often make basic errors in linguistic analysis. A frequent criticism is that prescription has a tendency to favor the language of one particular region or social class over others, and thus militates against linguistic diversity. Frequently, a standard dialect is associated with the upper class. For example, Great Britain's received pronunciation, RP has now lost much of its status as the Anglophone standard, and other standards are now alternative systems for English as a foreign language. Although these have a more democratic base, they still exclude large parts of the English-speaking world. Speakers of Scottish English, Hiberno English, Australian English, or African American English may feel the standard is slanted against them. Thus, prescription has political consequences. In the past, prescription was used consciously as a political tool. A second issue with prescriptivism is that it tends to explicitly devalue non-standard dialects. It has been argued that prescription, apart from formulating the norms of standard language, often attempts to influence speakers to apply the proposed linguistic devices invariably, without considering the existence of different registers and styles of language. While some linguists recognize the practical role of language standardization in modern nation-states, certain models of prescriptive codification have been criticized for going far beyond mere norm-setting, i.e. by promoting the sanctioned language variety as the only legitimate means of communication and presenting it as the only valid baseline of correctness, coupled with stigmatizing non-standard usages as mistakes. Such practices might contribute to perpetuating the belief that non-codified forms of language are innately inferior and less legitimate linguistically. This popular idea, however, goes against one of the fundamental principles of modern linguistics, which holds that all forms of language, including both vernacular dialects and different realizations of a standardized variety, are scientifically equal, even if deemed socially inappropriate for certain situations. Normative practices might also give rise to the conviction that explicit formal instruction is an essential prerequisite for acquiring proper command of one's native language. Propagating such language ideologies is characteristic of the prescriptivists in Eastern Europe, where normativist ideas of correctness can be found even among professional linguists. Another serious issue with prescription is that prescriptive rules quickly become entrenched, and it is difficult to change them when the language changes. Thus, there is a tendency for prescription to lag behind the colloquial language. In 1834, an anonymous writer advised against the split infinitive, reasoning that the construction was not a frequent feature of English as he knew it. Today the construction is in everyday use, and generally considered standard usage, yet the old prohibition can still be heard. A further problem is the difficulty of specifying legitimate criteria. Although prescribing authorities may have clear ideas about why they make a particular choice, and their choices are seldom entirely arbitrary. There exists no linguistically sustainable metric for ascertaining which forms of language should be considered standard or otherwise preferable. Judgments that seek to resolve ambiguity or increase the ability of the language to make subtle distinctions are easier to defend. Judgments based on the subjective associations of a word are more problematic. Finally, there is the problem of inappropriate dogmatism. Although competent authorities tend to make careful statements, popular pronouncements on language are apt to condemn. Thus, wise prescriptive advice identifying a form as colloquial or non-standard and suggesting that it be used with caution in some contexts may, when taken up in the classroom, become converted into a ruling that the preferred form is automatically unacceptable in all circumstances, a view academic linguists reject. Linguists may accept that a construction is ungrammatical or incorrect in relation to a certain lect if it does not conform to its inherent rules, but they would not consider it absolutely wrong simply because it diverges from the norms of a prestige variety. A classic example from 18th century England is Robert Loth's tentative suggestion that preposition stranding in relative clauses sounds colloquial. This grew into a grammatical rule that a sentence should never end with a preposition. Such dogmatism has often caused resentment. For these reasons, some writers argue that linguistic prescription is foolish or futile. Samuel Johnson commented on the tendency of some prescription to resist language change. When we see men grow old and die at a certain time one after another, from century to century, we laugh at the elixir that promises to prolong life to 1,000 years, and with equal justice may the lexicographer be derided, who, being able to produce no example of a nation that has preserved their